There was a house at the end of the road. No one ever entered, no one ever left. That's how I remember it. I was only a child, maybe 10 or 11. I lived on this typical road, with a little field across from the rows of identical brick houses. It looked like any other road in the country, but to me it was home. Number 9 was my house, with the white door. It was pretty small, but I was an only child, so I had a whole bedroom to myself. It had been a few years since my Disney princess phase, and the whole room was still a sickening pink. I had stopped inviting friends from school over, except Jake. He lived across the field, almost opposite, and I'd known him forever. He was this blonde kid, quiet, a bit slow now I look back on it, but he was always willing to come and play, usually at my house, sometimes at his, occasionally on the field. I wouldn't say I was a tomboy, but I didn't mind getting muddy, not for another year or two anyway. Sometimes we would look at the house at the end of the road, number 23. The front garden was overgrown with rhododendrons, but in the summer they would never flower. I always wanted to go look closer, but something kept us away from the house. Maybe it was the door, solid wood varnished and inky black. Maybe it was the windows, dark curtains always drawn, never any light from the inside. Maybe it was the way the adults reacted. I'd never really asked about it. It had just kind of always been there, a permanent and unchanging fixture of childhood. But as we got older, Jake and I had started looking at the house more closely, wondering about it. The other houses changed slowly. Long grass got cut, cars changed in driveways, doors got repainted, new windows put in. But the house at the end never changed. It was in March when I asked my mom. It had started raining, so she'd come to pick me up from school in her battered blue car. I had asked her when we drove past, "What's with that house?" She took a few seconds to answer. "What, 21? I think the Sanders still live there." She parked us outside our house, and I couldn't help but look across the front gardens to the overgrown bushes and point. "No, that one, 23. Mom had paused for a second, and her eyes sort of slid right over it. She stood perplexed, as if she'd just forgotten something, and she changed the topic. "Fish fingers all right for tea?" It threw me. My mum had always listened to me, even if I was just gossiping about the girls at school, or talking about my nonsensical daydreams. She'd never ignored me like that. I tried again over dinner, asking Mom about the overgrown house. "There isn't a 23, sweetie. Do you mean the one around the corner?" I dropped my fork into my beans, frustrated. "No, the one all overgrown with bushes, with the black door, the one where the curtains are always closed." She tilted her head, looking at me sidelong with a smirk. "Is this like the thing with the fairies?" "No, and I don't believe in fairies." My mom suppressed a little giggle. "Not anymore, at least." I'd got quite angry and had finished my dinner in a surly silence. I didn't even realize how well she'd deflected my question until later. I'd gone over to Jake's house just before it had gotten dark. I'd said hi to his parents before I dashed up to his room, where I found Jake playing on his PlayStation. For the next half an hour, I'd vented, calling my mom a bunch of words that would have received a smack around the head if I'd said them anywhere near her. Luckily, Jake's parents didn't care about swearing. It was like she couldn't even see it. She just kind of looked past it. Jake nodded, the car in his game slamming into the barrier, like it did every lap. He'd never really understood the concept of braking. Maybe it's like illegal or something. I sat up from where I'd been sprawled on his Ben 10 bed. "What do you mean?" "Dunno." "What if we aren't allowed to talk about it? Maybe someone died there or it was used by criminals or something." "Don't be stupid, Jake. You can't make it illegal to talk about something." Jake paused his game at last, turning to face me. "My dad said there's words which are illegal." He looked around guiltily before leaning in and whispering what I knew was a much worse word than any swears. It gave me pause for a moment before I lay back down. "That's not illegal. It's in lots of old books and stuff. I think you'll just get you beaten up if you say it at school. But I bet you'll be in a load of trouble with the teachers." "Yeah, but they won't call the police or anything." Temporarily distracted by the sort of conversation only 11-year-olds can have, My eyes drifted to the window. Across the field and down the street, the house sat, stuck on the end of the road. It wasn't unsettling, it was compelling. I interrupted whatever Jake was saying. We should just go and look. What? I continued. It's a mystery. We should investigate. We always talk about it. Jake looked unsure, clutching his controller. I don't know. What if there is something bad? We could get hurt. And what if it's just a normal house? We'd probably get in trouble with whoever lives there. I lay there, bicycling my legs in the air. Anytime Jake objected to something, it only made me want to do it more, if only to make him uncomfortable. Well, I vote that we go. It's just down the road. We can go and come back in 5 minutes flat. Well, I vote. Boys don't get a vote. A bit more prodding and pulling got him out the door. It had stopped raining, and the air smelt fresh and alive as we crossed the field under the darkness of night. It wasn't that cold, and we both had on hoodies anyway. Jake had even put on his Arsenal scarf. I felt the need to put my hood up and try to sneak towards the house. Why are you walking like that? You look like a retard. I'm trying to be sneaky, I said, turning to glare at Jake, something lost in the dark. Why? I don't know. Just feels like the right thing to do. The house was ahead, the house that never changed, that no one entered or left. We had made our way nearly to the waist-high iron gate that marked the threshold. The rhododendrons were unshaken by the breeze. The windows, recessed and shadowed, were like the eye sockets of a skull, and something was different about the unchanging house. The door stood ajar. For an instant, I felt a fluttering in my belly. Not fear, but excitement, adrenaline. I turned and grinned at Jake, who only looked worried. It's open, I whispered. Yeah. Come on, we can have a look inside. Jake reached for my arm, but I pushed open the gate and stepped into the overgrown garden, forcing him to follow. The gate swung soundlessly on its hinges. What are you doing? Jake whispered urgently. I just want to look, that's all. I pressed up the path, twisting my torso to avoid disturbing the bushes. Jake finally grabbed my hand and only gave a weak tug back towards the road before he relented, letting me drag him onwards. And then we were there, stood before the door. I was breathing loudly and realized my heart was thundering in my chest. I felt electric, tingling. Here I was standing where I'd always avoided, on the threshold of the big mystery of my short life. I reached for the slightly ajar door, looking at the dull brass knob. Jake squeezed my other hand hard. Let's go home. No, I whispered, matching his barely audible words. I'm scared. I don't care, let's just have a look. I grasped the knob. It was warm to the touch, warmer than expected on a blustery March night. I pushed. Soundlessly, eagerly, the door swung inward, the house exposing itself to us. It was dark inside, dark, yet not featureless. There was a strange cast to the darkness. It was black, but visible. I could see the stairs on the left, leading upwards. I could see the bare, empty hallway with its solitary rug, stretching back into the house, a door at the end, another on the right side, seemingly built to the same plan as mine and Jake's house. That shouldn't be possible, I knew. It was night, it was dark outside, and there was no light inside. I shouldn't have been able to see, yet I could. Dragging Jake forward, I whispered in his ear, "Go on, take a look." "No way. Ladies first anyway." I rolled my eyes and tutted, but obliged. Still grasping his hand firmly, I passed into the house. It was very ordinary in looks, but the feeling was off. It was warm, uncomfortably warm. Stepping further into the corridor, looking through the bars of the banisters up to the second floor, I lowered my hood, shaking my hair free. I let go of Jake. Now he was standing beside me. The air was humid, almost thick, and I had to wipe my now sweaty hand on my jeans. The smell, as well, was out of place. Sweet, cloying, almost fruity, but I didn't recognize it. "It's a bit creepy," I relented. The excitement in my chest had turned to stone and dropped into my guts. "I don't like this. Let's go." I was still looking up at the second floor landing. the ceiling dark but still perceivable, when Jake let out a whimper like a sad dog. I turned. The door was gone. All the air rushed out of me in a sort of strangled groan. We rushed back, running our hands over the tepid wall where the door should have been. There was nothing, just smooth, hard wall, paint over concrete, over brick. "I'm scared," Jake said, voice a note louder than a whisper. "Me too." "What happened?" he said. "I don't know. Maybe this place is haunted." Jake scoffed, panic bright in his eyes. "Ghosts aren't real. It must be like a hidden door." I stood chewing a strand of my hair. "But then, my mom thought the house wasn't real." Jake just looked at me, breathing hard through his mouth. "No," he said. "It has to be a trap or something, like at school, when they tell us to stay away from strangers in vans and stuff." He nodded. "Probably a pedo's house." "No," I said. "Haven't you noticed the light?" "What about it?" I stopped, listening, but there was nothing. "There shouldn't be any. It's dark, there's no light, and the curtains are closed." Jake did a double take, looking about, realizing our impossible vision. "How?" he blurted. "It's the house, it wants us to see it." "But it's a house." I nodded. "A house only we can see that can make the doors disappear." He just looked at me painfully. "I really don't want to deal with Harry Potter stuff tonight. We have a French test tomorrow and I need my medicine." "Well, tough luck. We're going to have to look around." "Why?" he whined. "To find a way out, obviously. There's still the windows, and these doors have to go somewhere." It took some more hushed arguing before Jake finally moved. He'd unwrapped his scarf, leaving it dangling around his neck. The first door we checked was on the right of the hall. If it was like our houses, it should be the living room. Yet, when I pushed it open with its too warm knob, it wasn't the same. It was a longer, narrower room, totally empty, save another door on the right. Cheap linoleum flooring was peeling in a few places, and that sweet smell was more noticeable. But the door on the right should open to a small room with one of the front windows. I strode confidently to the door, grabbing its handle. I was going to throw it open with all the confidence of an 11-year-old who thinks they've just solved the puzzle. The door was stiff this time, as if being pulled from the other side. It took some effort, and when it opened, it came with a rush of hot, rancid air. There was no window, only another hall, just like the one at the front door. This one, though, the stairs on the left, went down. It was as fascinating as it was unsettling. For a moment, I was mostly struck by the thought that I'd never seen a real-life basement. It was only really something you saw on American TV, in The Simpsons and stuff. But I really didn't feel like wanted to get closer. There was something really nasty that stirred in my belly when I thought about descending. Maybe it was the smell, ranked up here to an appalling stench. A quick glance was enough to see that the stairs went really deep, way more than usual. The two doors, one at the end of the corridor, one on the right, were perfect duplicates of the ones in the first hall. I pushed back Jake, who was standing way too close behind me. "Back to the stairs." "Why?" he asked, as I started back to where we started. "Think, idiot. There shouldn't have been another hallway. There should have been the window there." Jake looked a little confused as he ran our path in his imagination. Then his mouth fell open. "This has to be a dream or something," was all he could come up with. I slapped him. Hard. It was pretty cruel, but it gave me a little thrill too. "Ow, what was that for?" "It hurt?" I asked. "Yes, of course it did, you jerk." "Then obviously this isn't a dream. Everyone knows dreams don't hurt." We crept back to the first hallway, though we'd already made enough noise to wake the dead. It was the same as before. The stairs, the door at the end, the one on the right, the front door conspicuous only by its absence. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, pacing in the narrow space in front of our missing escape. Jake was looking paler and scared than before. "I need to get home. I have to have my injection," he said. I'd forgotten. Every day at school he needed to have an injection and a biscuit or he died. Diabetes or whatever. He needed it in the evening too, but usually he did it before he came over to my house. That day, though, I'd gone to his unannounced. "You idiot, why didn't you do it before we left?" His face twisted. "It's your fault. You said we were only going to have a look." "It's not my fault!" I found myself suddenly angry. "You're the idiot with the weird disease." He looked like he wanted to hit me, fists bunched at his sides, tears in his eyes. I didn't give him the chance. I dashed down the hall to the door at the end, where the kitchen would be in mine or Jake's. "Where are you going? Maybe there's a back door or something." In truth, I just didn't want to think about Jake getting sick, as back then I didn't really understand how diabetes works. I threw open the door to the kitchen and froze. It wasn't a kitchen at all, just a small square room. In the center, facing the door, was an old wooden rocking chair, creaking as it swayed back and forth. It slowed as I stood there, eyes locked on it. It was as if someone had just left the instant before I opened the door. But that was impossible. There were no other doors, no other furniture to hide behind. "I don't like this." I wasn't talking to Jake. It was a quiet admission of true fear for the first time. I was scared. The impossible rooms had meant little to a child, unable to fully grasp the abstract. But now I was greeted by the unwelcome proof of life and the conspicuous disappearance of it. And yet, almost instantaneously, I was hit by the urge, the desire, to sit in the chair. A part of me felt that this was the place to sit and wait. I closed the door and we returned to the bottom of the stairs. We didn't speak. One glance at each other was enough to tell we were both terrified, but I was never one for inaction. I was chewing my hair again and looking up at the next floor. Maybe we should go up. "Why?" I shrugged. I tried, but I couldn't put it into words. I think some part of my mind equated height with safety, like a drowning man clawing to reach the surface. "I want to go down. Maybe there's a way out down the other stairs," Jake said. I shook my head. There was no way I was going down. I grabbed the banister with shaky hands and pulled myself upwards towards the landing. The stairs were steep, slightly steeper than they looked, forcing me to go slowly, one foot, then the other. It was strangely tiring, as if, instead of walking up normal stairs, I was climbing over a chest-high wall with each one. It felt like I spent hours climbing, but it could only have been a few seconds. At the top, I was breathing heavily, my thighs ached, and my hands hurt from holding the banister, as if I'd been gripping it as hard as I could. The landing was unpleasant. That sweet rancidity flavored the air, and there was a dull pressure that made my head pound. It was like a bad headache, but it felt like it came from outside my head, pressing on my skull. Despite my heavy breathing, I felt out of breath, and it took a few minutes to subside. Looking around, I could see I was at a crossroads of sort. In front, as well as left and right, were extremely long corridors that each ended in a single door. Behind me were the stairs, going back down. And no Jake. "Jake?" I shouted, hoping he was just out of view. But there was no response, and the space where the front door had once been was totally empty. I collapsed to the floor suddenly. The lightheadedness, the pressure, and now Jake's disappearance, all hitting at once. I don't know how long I sat there, halfway to utter hysterics. A while later, I think, I was sitting at the top of the stairs, arms around the legs, chin on my knees, rocking back and forth, my cheeks wet and snot crusted over my top lip. I never remembered actually crying, but I must have done. Perhaps the most sensible thing would have been to go downstairs and look for Jake, but the climb had exhausted me, and just like the basement stairs, I felt an overwhelming certainty that I couldn't go down. Instead, I dragged myself to my shaky feet and took the hallway across from the stairs. It was narrow. Again, the same bare, whitewashed walls that offered the house no personality. It was narrow, but it grew narrower. The door at the end was getting closer, the same size and shape. Yet, I had to twist sideways to fit through before the midpoint. Air flowed past me as I squeezed on, the walls of the hall pressing against my chest. The rushing air felt close to climax as the walls tightened further, pressing me so hard my chest hurt, and I couldn't breathe. I was panicking by then, desperately pushing, groaning as my own breath was pushed from me. As I was certain my ribs were about to shatter, when I closed my eyes and silently begged for my mom, the wind changed direction. The constrictive hallway, unchanging in appearance, seemed to relax on me, if only slightly. I could move again, squeezing and pushing myself towards the far end. Then, I was free of the wall's touch, able to hurry towards the door. The slackening went on with a final sigh, and I could stand and run normally, sprinting nearly straight into the door, grabbing the warm handle with a frantic energy and throwing it wide, hurling myself into the next room without looking. This next room was horrible. I was too young to understand fully, but the sight was haunting. It was round. Not only the walls, but the ceiling was domed, and the floor curved slightly towards the center. The whole room was covered in small white tiles, save for a rounded rusted grate in the middle of the floor. But what caught my eye immediately was the rope. Suspended somehow from the ceiling, a dull, normal-looking rope hung, ending in a circular loop. Even as a child, there was something paralyzing about seeing a noose and what it implied. And the room throbbed. Dully, slowly, the walls flexed, the slow rippling matched by a sudden change in pressure that I could feel in my ears. Being nearly crushed in the hallway had frightened me to stupidity, my brain just refusing to put together any kind of coherent thought. I could only stand and pant, tasting blood in my mouth. I just watched as the walls shifted rhythmically, stared at the rope twitching gently with the pulsating room. There was a door, straight opposite me. It was small, short, like a door to a wardrobe, or in a really old building. This one was black, cracked, as if it was made of charcoal. I walked around the curve of the floor, avoiding the rusty grate and trying not to touch the twitching rope. The walls throbbed at a steady pace, and I didn't want to touch them either. This door's brassy knob was almost too hot to touch, and it opened into a small, vertical space. All the walls were paneled with a rich, creamy-looking wood, full of knots and striking grain. A spiraling staircase made of thin, delicate black iron twisted impossibly high. The house didn't have a third story, I knew, yet here were stairs reaching way higher than that. It aroused a spark in me, the rooms behind forgotten, as I was faced with yet another mystery. When I was very little, I'd listened constantly to my dad, when he was alive, reading me stories. Jack and the Beanstalk, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, hundreds of stories about princesses up towers. I wasn't into princesses anymore, but here was a tower of my own to climb. It compelled me even to ignore my bruised chest, to forget Jake, and to start up the stairs. But I didn't. I couldn't. Part of the pain in my chest was more than just what the walls had done. Despite my earlier protests, I was very worried about Jake. A big part of my mind told me it was his fault. He was just a stupid boy that did anything I said, and it was his own fault for being a coward and not climbing the stairs. But a quieter voice knew that I was responsible, that I'd dragged a shy, sick kid into this house, that I'd climbed the stairs against his protests, without thinking about him at all. I was a stupid, selfish little girl, and here I was, in a nightmare alone, and it was my fault. The realization, along with the fear that had been growing since I first entered, brought back the tears. I stood at the foot of the dainty staircase, weeping pathetically, wiping at my eyes with the back of my hands. Eventually the tears stopped coming. I was breathless, gasping, throat sore, at the bottom of that impossible, delicate staircase. I looked up, to where the spindly metalwork reached an impossible landing far above. It wasn't alone. Several times, at various heights, the staircase branched out, like a spider's web, reaching to other doorways set in the tower. Staring up at it made me slightly dizzy and a little nauseous, but there was something quite beautiful about it. I grasped the thin iron guardrail that snaked up besides the steps, gasping aloud at how cold it was. Then I was climbing, circling up and up and up. All around me, the gran of the wood, the knots and flowing lines shifted. They contracted and expanding, pushing and squeezing their mass in riding organic movements. They shivered and spasms ran through them at times, running from the bottom up and out of sight. As I climbed, my breathing grew labored again, but this time it also grew colder, a lot colder. I could see my breath misting before me in the transparent dark. The iron under my hand was so bad I had to pull my sleeves over my hands, and my nose and ears stung. There must have been a dozen stories I passed, each one floored with a web of black iron, a ring of doors of all kinds of colors and shapes, each with a simple brass doorknob. I didn't stop. In the stories, they never stop partway up the tower and decide that's far enough. I wasn't scared of heights, and even though I was tired and drained and my throat hurt, my legs forced themselves to keep going, to take step after step, circling endlessly amongst writhing wood and cold iron. Eventually, when I felt utterly freezing and there wasn't any weird sweet smell anymore, I reached that impossible top landing. There was only one spidery narrow path here, hundreds of meters above the pulsating noose chamber. It led straight across, to a round, deeply recessed door. I walked towards it, feet dragging as the cold iron made weird creaking noises and ice fell from it. The door was gray, and reaching out it was soft and taut. It was like touching a drum with a slightly loose skin. My hand clasped the brass knob, the heat feeling almost scalding in comparison to the cold air. But I bit my lip and twisted, opened the door, and stepping through. It was a cold room, the size of a warehouse. Bare brick walls, floor hidden beneath a curling mist. Metal chains and hooks bigger than I was, dangled from the rafters, shifting and tapping in a non-existent breeze. And there were screens, everywhere sitting in stacks against the walls, piled on one another. TVs, new flat screens, big old square ones, tiny ones built into radios, ancient black and white ones framed in wood, huge ones taking straight from a mansion. There were monitors and laptops, even projectors, the huge cinema kinds, and the little white boxy ones they used at school. 100,000 screens were fitted in that cold, foreboding place at the top of the impossible tower, and on all of them was me. Like a family photo album made a nightmare, everywhere my eyes searched were photos of myself. It was sickening, terrifying, and I almost started crying again. There was my 6th birthday, where I'd insisted only I could dress as a princess, and got in a fight with a girl named Charlotte. That was me at Dad's funeral, crying as they carried his coffin. I was only 8 in that one. And there was me last week, playing football with Jake and a few local kids on the field just across from the house. Hundreds, thousands. Me at almost every age, in every place I'd ever been. There was the school trip to Portchester Castle last year. There was me with my mum when we went to London last Christmas. There was me sleeping, me getting changed for PE, photos of me in the shower, me sat on the toilet. Those ones, of me at my most vulnerable, should have been sickening. But for a child, the whole thing was beyond imagining, beyond understanding. The house had wanted me, for years, for my whole life. It had needed me inside it. It had called to me, sitting there, at the end of the road, unseen or ignored by adults. My mother hadn't willingly ignored me. She'd just blocked the whole thing from her mind. If she refused to see it, to acknowledge it, then clearly it wasn't happening. If she refused to believe in it, then she wasn't responsible. And now, there I was. Whatever it was, building or nightmare or creature, it completed something at that moment, reached some sort of climax. I fell as the floor jerked underfoot, the whole room and its walls undulating and tensing, only to relax instantly as screens and monitors crashed down around me, chains and hooks rattling. What TVs weren't destroyed now just showed static. It was done with me. On some level, it had stripped me of my innocence, and that had satisfied it. I understood none of this. I just rushed to my feet and went for the door, thinking this must be an earthquake or something. I threw open the taut skin door, and was surprised by what I found. The once impossibly tall tower had shrunk, becoming flaccid, and now I was only 3 turns of the staircase from the door to the hanging room. I raced down, throwing myself through the door, not caring if I stepped on the grate or touched the noose. I hurtled through the white, rounded room, now beating only faintly, restfully. Then was the corridor. I paused, scared. It had nearly crushed me to death last time. This time I stood and watched, and could see its contractions. Slow, very slow, but rhythmic, steady, predictable. It was easy to slip through as it was widening before it could close again. That brought me to the stairs. On the way up, they had felt like climbing a mountain, but now I knew it wouldn't be anywhere near as hard. "Hello?" The voice was thick with terror and pleading, but I knew it. Jake, you're alive." My heart did something weird then. I was flooded with relief, giving me the strength to pound down the stairs and over to the right door where the voice was coming from. But as soon as the relief hit, anger came with it. If Jake was fine, then I had been feeling guilty for nothing, and that meant Jake hurt me by making me feel guilty. So it was that I stormed through the next door into the reeking basement entrance, ready to slap the shit out of Jake and use all the worst swear words I knew. Is that you?" he said. I froze. "Please. It hurts, and I'm so scared." He reeked of puke. His clothes were all slimy, and he'd clearly dragged himself out of the basement. He looked around with bloody, leaking pits where his eyes should be. All his skin was red and blistered, and blood oozed from everywhere. "Please, I know it's you. I heard you. I can't see." He reached around blindly with fingers that ended in bloody stumps. I was at his side in an instant, feeling sick, the tears coming back again. I grabbed his slimy jacket, ignoring the stinging slipperiness of it, and started pulling him towards where the entrance had been. "What happened?" I said, choking and hiccuping as the tears welled. I thought I could get out through the basement." I got him through the first door, his legs kicking uselessly. But then the stairs, they stopped and got smooth. I fell for ages, and then I landed somewhere wet, and it burned, he said. My own hands were burning as I pulled him around the next corner into the entrance corridor. I hurt so much, and then I couldn't see. I thought I was going to die. I just started grabbing at the walls, started climbing, he said. I could see it. The door, black varnished and so normal looking, was there. Now that I'd brought the house to its release, it was letting me leave. The door swung open to show overgrown rhododendrons and the field, still late at night. The house was at last finished with me, but clearly not with Jake. There was tension on his side suddenly. I slipped and fell. Looking back, I could see the rug was tangled around Jake's legs, tight enough to hurt, as he started moaning louder. I rushed over to grab him, but he was too slimy and I couldn't get a good hold. Then the ceiling started moving, lowering like some great piston. Slowly but inevitably, a wedge-like block of it came down, closing just on him. I came down on him, just below his shoulders. I grabbed him by the scarf still around his neck, the only place I could. I pulled, but the house pulled back harder. I braced my leg against the closing ceiling, desperately tugging as Jake started to scream, as he started to be crushed. His screaming seemed loud enough to wake the whole street when suddenly it stopped. I went flying back, backstepping, then falling, down the corridor and through the door. I landed on my back with my leg now burning with pain. Something round and blonde and leaking rolled into the bushes. I was left gasping in pain, holding a bloody arsenal scarf, looking at a closed black door. Fear and adrenaline and pain battled inside me. My leg was a twisted mess. There was no sign of Jake, and I was bleeding heavily through my jeans. My palms were raw and oozing. I don't really remember the rest. I think I crawled, or maybe I stood up and limped. Either way, after I lost consciousness, someone found me on the side of the road. They called an ambulance. Apparently that woke the street, and my mum was there by the time it arrived. But my next memory was waking up in the hospital a few days later. I had actually woken a few times before that, but I'd been on so much morphine it was just a blur of white ceilings and disjointed memories. Then came the questions, and no one believed me. My mother sat by my side, spoke over me. She claimed I'd never had a friend called Jake, that there was no number 23, that I'd never talked about a mysterious house with a black door that never changed. And who would doctors and child psychologists believe? A drugged-up 11-year-old with an insane story? Or my calm, smiling mother, just happy her daughter wasn't too hurt? I spent a few weeks in hospital, having my leg pinned and sewn back together. I hated it. The doctors and counselors and all the other experts were awful. I hated their fake, pitiful smiles. I was disgusted by their patronizing smugness. Some pretended to buy into my story, only to give me a sickening fake smile and tell me not to worry, that there was a sensible explanation. Eventually I was released, with nothing but a pair of crutches and an alprazolam prescription to help me with my active imagination. By the time I was out, Jake's house was empty of life and furniture. A for sale sign hammered into the front garden. My mom maintained for a few years that we had argued at dinner, I'd ran away and been hit by a car. Once I was older, she just refused to talk about it. At school, once I went back, it became obvious what had happened. The other kids, even that cow Charlotte, talked in hushed whispers about how we missed Jake. If any teachers overheard anyone discussing it, they'd be suspended and told to stop spreading lies, or our parents would be involved. It's been nearly 20 years. I've been through school, university, moved half a dozen times. My mom still denies it on the rare occasions I talk to her. As soon as I bring up Jake's name, looking for missing person reports, the police hang up. The world likes to pretend that bad things don't happen to children. They like to think that they're all kept safe. That would be nice. But I know that when bad things happen, no one wants to take accountability. The adults, the teachers, even the police. They'd rather bury their heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening. But I know what really happened. Because all these years later, at the back of my wardrobe, is a box with an arsenal scarf in it, stained a mottled brown.